There. Can you all still hear me on Zoom? Cool. Okay. So a little bit of background about me. I am going into my 6th year of my PhD at UW-Madison, and I work with folks. I'm actually in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, where we have our own little design, informal, creative education. All of the games people, we live in the basement of the teacher education building, and it's great because that's where we have all the fun things. I also work with folks at the Center for Research on Complex Thinking, mostly around some of the models that you're going to see today. And a lot of the inspiration for this work that I'm going to be uncovering comes both from my time as a middle and high school science teacher, where I worked with a lot of students who were like, I can't possibly do science, I hate science. And when I would try to bring science games into the classroom, they were like, this is a trap. And we're not entirely convinced or sure what they were supposed to do within the game. And when I would finally get them to no, for real, this is a game. Look, there are comics, it's fun. They were like, okay, so we can actually play. And then as a teacher, I would go look at the dashboards that I was given about what these students were doing in the game, and there was a whole lot of red about well, they're not making progress. They're not completing these missions. This student has started 50 missions in this game, and they have not completed a single one. So, they're doing stuff, though. They're out there collecting data. They're I could see them talking with their classmates about what was happening in the game. So I really came into my PhD thinking a lot about what does it mean to play a game from an analytics standpoint. What are we communicating with stakeholders about what learners are doing in these spaces? And aside from that, I am the player that you don't want to give the grenade to, because I will blow the party up. I'm always looking for where are the bounds of the system and how can we push on those a little bit, or what would happen if we just left curve right here. So all of that to say both of those things kind of inspire the way that I'm thinking about this question of finding playfulness. The game that I'm using for my dissertation is a game called Wake. This is just a promo video that they had of it. It was developed by the Field Day Lab at UW-Madison. And I was really fortunate to be able to participate in its development as the content designer. So I did a lot of the construction of missions and what kind of science are we putting in? What are the tasks that players have to do? There's a lot of work that students have to do within this game. So you can see that I'll go through some of the mechanics again, but they have access to this ship. They can go to different sites where they're exploring just different parts of the world. So going out scanning different critters to figure out well, what species lives in this part of the world? What species lives over here? They interact with different characters along the way. There's several scientist characters that they interact with. They get to run experiments and keep track of all of their findings in both a journal and their more scientific, what we call AQOS, which is Aquos, where basically the entire currency of the game is facts. So things that they're finding out, whether it's that they took a population count of a particular site for a species, or that they even found out that a species exists in a particular place. Eventually they start making models of what their data could be showing for historic data. Do they understand enough of what happens in that ecosystem to say that oh, the trends of these populations kind of make sense? There's also terrifying dreams, which the middle schoolers were enamored with. The kids that I did pilots with, they got to the first one and they were like, what is this? And I was piloting with a fairly non-traditional school, and even they were a little thrown we were not expecting this in our science game. So like I said, our main mechanics that we have are these conversations that you can have. So the first station you start out with, the lead scientist is actually your mom. And the mechanic, each station has this pairing of characters where there's a research scientist and a like person who's gonna help you level up your sub or level up your ship or your science tools. That's the mechanic. And that is your TO. You also have access to Victor, who is your personal computing friend, who kind of travels with you and can help give guidance and help. You can explore through the game. So whether you're up at what we call the top world during development, kind of navigating around the world to different research sites, or under the surface, where you're kind of up close and personal with different parts of the ecosystem. You can run experiments. There's multiple different types. This one's an observation tank, where you're just trying to see if some sort of interaction even happens. Like, if I put these things into the same tank, does one of them get eaten? Which is a big thing that they really enjoy watching. Like, if I just throw stuff together, what happens? There's also a stress tank where you can see, like, what are the environmental tolerances of a particular species, and a measurement one, which is a little more precise, has a little more dials to it, but it helps the players get like a quantitative measure of how those behaviors take place, so that they can go do more precise modeling. This is the modeling. So one of the goals in the game is that players can actually intervene in ecosystems or propose interventions. So they can kind of go through these stages of different models. And eventually they have to argue with the characters, right? Like scientific inquiry, which is what the game was based on, usually ends in trying to position what you're thinking back to your community or back to some other stakeholder. That's what they do in Wake, is every job ends in this argument phase, where players go back through the Aqua system and kind of identify, this is from the first job that players ever do, they're trying to understand the food web at a particular site, and they have to pick these facts that or behaviors they've collected. Giant kelp is eaten by urchins, gives one piece of evidence there. There's also a bunch of narrative components. So like I said, they have that like official science like repository of information. They also, at the end of each job and at the end of each like discovery or adding a new place or having a nightmare, get to add to their journal here. So there's an overall narrative arc. You start with your family, you find out things about like your sister who you don't really know much about. Throughout the game, as you encounter these different scientists and characters who have met your sister in previous like missions, I guess. And through that, you're kind of understanding not only things about yourself and your family, but also about the ecosystems that you're visiting and some of the larger like phenomena around the ecosystems, like invasive species, things like that. And of course, here's one that is the nightmares, where this is vertebrae from a whale fall that players have to go through, and they get taken back through that scene where some of the vertebrae are like glitching out and they shrink down and it's really creepy. They wind up like going through the skeleton. They get really into it. That was it. You could tell when the players were getting to that part because inevitably somebody would shriek in the classroom. And when we were first playtesting, it was all through Zoom. And so we would just hear like a disembodied voice yelling at the background. It was great. So the question that I've been personally wrestling with is, what does it look like when players are playful here? Like, what does that even mean for them as they're going through this experience? Because I've seen examples, and one of the pieces of literature that I'm drawing on is actually some work that was done by Freyer when trying to understand playfulness as a personality trait, not necessarily as an enacted behavior, but with the idea that like these kinds of ways of thinking about playfulness likely would contribute to particular behaviors. So kids who, or people in general, who are very like other directed, are those who are really, they like to joke around, they're really playful with other people, kind of performative. They're my great improv friends who are like really just putting themselves out there. Lighthearted is more my vibe. It's the like Hakuna Matata, like everything's fine. Like we could just, things could go to total chaos, things could be imploding and everything will be fine. We'll just like improvise and fix it. The intellectual playfulness is the one that they talk about a lot more in science education literature. When you're thinking about playing with ideas and being willing to iterate, willing to like consider like what would that look like? How might that work? And all of those kinds of questions. And whimsical is the final kind of construct that Breuer uses in the development of this measure of playfulness. And it's kind of the idea of playing with identity or being non-conforming. So kind of keeping those four in mind is how I'm trying to envision what might it look like for these analytics or looking for particular behaviors in this game. So one example, and I don't know how yet to measure it because the kids just broke the game. I'm literally in the classroom watching these kids drive around their ship. And I hear somebody like yell, "What's in the abyss?" And I was like, "The abyss? Like what are you all talking about?" And they're like, "We're in the abyss." Is Kevin in the abyss? Side note, Kevin was a character who died like in the development process, who got like removed from the game, and they're like, "You need to put Kevin in the abyss." I was like, Kevin is not going into the abyss, guys. But they were convinced that that needed to happen. But how do you find in analytics outside of like, I was like, well, maybe I could look at how long they're spending driving around. Because literally what they had done was they managed to clip their ship onto a rock and glitched it outside the zone so that they left the scene and then we're just driving around non-structured space. So it was just the little ship in total blackness. And I was like, do you guys even know how to get back to the game? Like, are you just, I was concerned for their save progress. They were not concerned. And I was like, this is really interesting because they really were pushing on the bounds of that system and trying to understand, like, could there be something out here? But in like, by any other definition of analytics, it's, oh, they're lost. They're not making progress. They're not like engaged because we're not seeing that forward trajectory in the game. There's one example. Another one was a kiddo who was really wanted to see how big our branching narrative could go. Every time they entered an argument, it was, well, what if I go just a little bit wrong? Like, do I get the same feedback as if I just throw a wild fact out there? They were like, they knew what kinds of facts they were supposed to present. They knew because like they're based on different shapes. So again, this is like an early one. So we only see this initial shape, but they're kind of change as you go on to give the players a little bit of assistance, but they knew exactly what they were supposed to present in the argument. They just didn't want to. Which to me is just funny. Like, and it kind of speaks to that idea of, okay, so you are maybe trying to explore who these characters are. Like, I think about when you're playing some of the more open world games and you just kind of keep going and poking the bear to see like, well, maybe if I talk to them 15 times, I'll get a different response, right? And that's kind of what this felt like. But again, registered in the, like a system as, well, they gave an incorrect response. So they're getting a helpful like cue to what the correct response was. So like, how can we think about finding that? The other one, like I mentioned, experimentation lends itself well to exploding things and systems. So they could also kind of poke at the system here, thinking about in this particular job of coral ocean plastics, the whole reason we included this job was because the teachers at the middle school level were obsessed with like, we have to talk about ocean plastics. And I was like, but we're doing, like, I don't know how we're gonna do this. So it turns out turtles actually eat plastic bags. And it's unfortunate because they think that they're jellyfish. So that's the whole premise of this job, is that the players have to add a plastic bag into the like experiment tank with the turtle to get that fact back out. And it is like, they see them in the environment together. It's not like we're asking them to make a huge leap. They see the like floating plastic bags with the turtles. So it comes pretty naturally. I think that these kids just really like turtles, because the northern sea nettle you never see in the game outside of like a weird part of the Arctic. And when you go to set up the experiments, you can see which things are actually included in the same ecosystem and which ones aren't. So like another guidepost to be like, maybe don't go that route. Northern sea nettles, also really unhappy being put into coral reef waters. It's a little toasty for them. But they did this not just once, but like multiple times. With just taking, maybe they actually just really like the northern sea nettle, because they just like wanted to drop that in other experiments along the way too, just in case, like what might happen if. So those are all examples that like, most of them I was there in the room, or at least in proximity. But one of my questions coming from more of like the learning analytics, or like data mining world is, how do we do this at scale, like if we're not in the same room? How can we start to reconsider some of these behaviors? And so I have just a couple ways that I've like been trying this so far. So one of the methods that I use a whole lot is something called epistemic network analysis. And basically it uses qualitative codes and then looks at like, are they happening at the same time? Draw a line between them. And so things that are brighter, thicker, have bigger lines, have more connections between the two things. So in this one of the things that I was really interested in, now that I like can't zoom into it anymore, is that this middle one is scenes. The top is task complete. That's what this little node is. And then over here is knowledge. And so somehow we're seeing learners that are split here between going into a scene and having that connected with like getting some fact or some piece of knowledge out of it. So I'm thinking of those ones as like, these are the people who are like, they know what they're supposed to do, they're going to the right place, they're getting the right thing, and they're just cruising through the game. And then there's folks who are just kind of like bopping between changing rooms, changing scenes. They're just meandering. I enjoy meandering in games. It's a really pretty game. And so one of my goals is to take some of these players that are kind of hanging out in this corner and see what it is that they're actually doing. To do that, I've started looking at, oh, here is the larger one. Okay, that would have been useful. So again, you can see kind of like, this has a couple different codes. Again, having that knowledge piece of getting that piece of information. This one's connected with task complete. So each job has multiple tasks. So are they just getting information in the game to try to like complete a task or to try to move the game forward? Or are they getting it for their own sake?
That's some knowledge there, that's got a fact.
Yeah. So I'm intrigued, like, what are these folks doing? Like,
What's help seeking?
help seeking is going and asking Victor for help.
Okay.
So right now it kind of, these are just like very base level,
Sure.
Like I said, real rough, mostly based just on the events that we have. So argument struggle again is that like you provided the wrong fact.
Got it.
Diving is just that you're going into one of the ecosystems. So not that you're in the top world, you're not moving around your ship, you're actually trying to go explore the ecosystems.
And so then you're saying the people that are up on that right there, they're doing diving and like they're, and help seeking there, is that actually asking Victor a question or is it just talking?
Just talking to Victor.
Okay. So it could just be people that like Victor and then just going diving, because Victor's also in the sub room, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So just kind of chilling. And Victor's kind of permanent throughout the game. So you can always ask Victor questions or get like more information from Victor.
And Jen, this is coded in vivo or the qualitative piece? in the Vivo software, or?
How's it-
So it's coded right now, just using Python, just kind of event matching, because each event is sent with its own name. Eventually, what I've been doing is I have a little like Shiny app that I've been working on that lets me look at like by the job different chunks of data. So like this is an example of one I was looking at that I thought was interesting because I have no idea what the player's doing here. Outside of the fact that they're like they go to talk to the person in the room, like in the station. So do you have anything to report for your current job? They open Aquos. They go to the job tab. They leave Aquos. They open Aquos. They go to the species tab. They put it away. They open it again. Like, what are we doing?
Are these timestamped? Are they, like, how quickly are they opening and closing?
Good question. I keep meaning to put that as a append to the end of these statements so that I
Is
can
what
look
the
at
name
that.
is right now?
No, I don't know what that is.
Okay.
It's a ghost NAN that just keeps showing up that I managed to get rid of 2 over the past week, and I don't know where the other ones are coming from at this point, but they're just hanging out.
But it maybe something to point out with this, this is a, like, a script interpretation of a stream of log data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically what I've been doing, I'm just gonna share my whole screen because it's gonna
So
make
they
it
have-
easier.
Timestamps under the hood.
Yeah,
They're just
yeah,
not making
okay.
it to this thing.
I'm sorry, could you go back to the slide 18 or 17? What are the axes on these slides?
Thank you for asking that question.
Good question.
Yeah.
So the first time I ever run these models, basically, epistemic network analysis was originally like envisioned as a way to do discourse analysis. That's what it's usually used for. It's thinking more about like small groups of students working, or I mean, people have done it on a lot of different things. Collaborative gameplay even, or Twitter conversations. But usually you have multiple groups that you're comparing, and then the axes start to be what those groups are and like maximizing your variance between them. This is just using dimensional reduction. So it uses singular value decomposition, SVD, as a dimensional reduction to try to spread all of the units as far apart as it can. So to get as much variance between them as possible. So here, these are all of my players from my pilot, all of these little black dots. And so it's trying to say, like, if we move them far apart to try to describe what's different about them, how can we what would those axes look like?
And so in principle, this is, because you got like 5 nodes here, this is really like a 5 to the 2-dimensional space. And you're pressing it down to 2D.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah. Dimensionality reduction becomes a little difficult to.
Yeah.
Once you see it, it makes sense, but like getting the mental process to go from 5-dimensional space to 2-dimensional space is not something our brains are built for.
In the 5-dimensional space, if a player is closest to knowledge, does that mean that they're doing that the most often? Or what's the interpretation?
Well, it's actually, it's 5 to the 2, right? Because there's essentially an axis for each co-occurring code,
Relationship.
right?
Yeah, so I opened this just to be able to show. So this is like what the matrix would look like,
Yeah.
right? Not that this is at all helpful at that scale. Here we go. We'll just mess that page up a whole bunch. But so it's looking at like when does task completed happen with job completed? Like
Yeah.
how many times do those things happen together?
And is that immediate adjacent or just they exist in the same like block of?
So for the one that I ran, I think I used 10. Within 10
Okay,
lines.
got it. And ordered? Like this task have to come first? No?
This one, no.
Does that make sense?
You can do that. But I was not playing around with the ordered.
So in a
Nonsense,
window of 10
just yet.
events, did those 2 events exist with each other?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
So mostly going off of like other interesting ways to look at this data. I would be very interested in seeing effectively, I mean, and I'll add, I don't know how far into your experiment you would run before such a, I'm gonna say it's like a tree would branch off into indescribable numbers of nodes, but basically taking the individual logs, mapping them all out together through, I have no idea what your axes would look like, but basically to try and, I would be interested in seeing the longer progression of, you know, we anticipate seeing sort of X numbers of times checked for help before a task is complete and all of that sort of behind the scenes.
So are you saying you're suggesting like seeing the full trace?
Yes,
Or
yes,
counts?
and attempting as best as possible to basically be able to look through and say, you know, the traces are all probably gonna start somewhat similar, and then watching for the points that they bring out. Yeah, that's not the easiest thing to do, but.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've run into, even just with something as simple as like setting up the observation tank,
Mhm.
is, and this is just a question, like, I don't know if it's meaningful or not, but player opens the experiment tank. They choose the bulk kelp forest,
Mhm.
okay? They go to pick their organisms, they pick 4 of them. And then they pause, and then they unpick all 4 of them, and then they go back to the experiment or the environment screen and they click on like 4 different ones before settling back at the bulk kelp one. And then they go back and choose just 2 of the ones that they were going to and then actually run their experiment. Like,
Are you observing them do this, right? I mean, it's
so
just
there's that level of,
having a conversation with the person next to them about like, what does the interface do, right? Like, could be very innocuous behavior. And it seems
Right.
like a direct observation would help unpack.
Like, not every action is meaningful, right? Like,
Oh, for
these
sure.
things can be rolled up, and like, just that maybe piggyback on what you were saying, maybe like, don't cross the stream so early, so. Like, maybe you wanna consider like a framework analysis for the qualitative, and sort of as a mixed methods analysis, leave the quantitative separate for a while from the qualitative. Do a framework analysis on maybe 5 themes, right? Like, just kind of roll it up into 5 themes with the qualitative stuff that you have. Quantitative stuff, maybe roll that up into like 5-ish behaviors that you can sort of quantify and not worry so much about counting every instance of kelp picking and unpicking, and just roll that up into like a behavior set of kelp behaviors, or,
yeah,
you know what I mean? So you're not sort of bogged down for 5 years, 6 years on counting every single instance of kelp touching,
But
right?
if you're looking
Or-
at
or
people
like-
that just
yeah.
like to poke though,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
then that is
And that
really
might
relevant,
emerge as like
right?
one of the 5 quantitative behaviors that you love to
Yeah,
do,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I was
Or the
gonna,
higher order behavior would be like kelp browse, or not kelp, but browsing,
Yeah,
right? So like, they do all this stuff, and then at the end, they landed on something. Right?
And you are working on, you were saying that like, you are gonna be working on building some coding stuff. better
Yeah.
coding stuff. Because right now, this was partly an artifact of, we needed to do this session specifically at this time. That you started with the raw events, just to have a
right, just
thing
to
to
have
put on
some
the side.
like base level on.
But this is your shiny app.
This is the
Yeah.
shiny app, so this is kind of how I've been working through thinking about, you know, maybe it is that even those 6 behaviors all do go together, and that is more of like a browsing behavior. And we can have that as like, maybe this is them like not committing to poking just yet, but like, one of the things that I have is a more detailed code for mismatch, where I take every organism in the game and every environment, and have anytime there is like non-congruence where they don't ever exist together, labeling that as a mismatch. Same thing in modeling, where they're trying to add just random things into the intervention models. Why? But having a way to kind of describe that, and using this to be able to see how many lines actually contribute to it, because that's one of the things that I've had issues with other software, is just they want me to pick like, oh, you need to look at the whole job, and you can either label the whole job as something or not, or the whole task or not. And I needed it to be a little bit more flexible, so I can at least see it and label it line by line, but I can go back and forth with what granularity I want to see the like window.
And part of the long-term goal with a tool like this would be, this is essentially you pull like an arbitrary snapshot of some of the stream coming in off the log data.
Yeah,
You could define a pattern. That pattern can now run on every log that comes in on this game ever for the future, and it gets what, tens of thousands of players
Yeah.
a week? I'm looking at Dave. And so so this is kind of like you're defining a tag, and then that tag can now go run on the rest of the data.
yeah, and then we can have counts and other
And then you can
things
see
like
these
that.
email
Yeah.
plots or counts or whatever related to other things, and it essentially becomes a metric or another event that gets injected into the stream. Rather than one that came from the game, but one that came from the analysis.
And even going back to like, well, where do you even start, or thinking about what are you looking for? Originally thinking about like, well, are there certain jobs? That's one of the reasons I started with plotting, was to see, I've noticed a lot around the whale fall job, for example. One of the ways that that job was designed was that you had to go buy an upgrade before completing it. One kid figured out if you could get caught on the vertebrae, you would be able to scan everything. And so treated it as a like spatial puzzle to get their submarines stuck every time and be able to complete it without the upgrade. Knowing that that exists is like, maybe I start there looking for some of the interesting things. Knowing in those first jobs when it opens up beyond just the kelp forest, that we can have more of that like probing behavior starting there. In reviewing these logs, the other thing is that I am going to be taking that survey that I was talking about earlier and embedding it within the game to be able to collect that data, to give me an idea of like, oh, this particular player scores really high on the intellectual items. I should probably review all of their log data to like be able to see maybe what the possibility is for even displaying some of the playfulness or playful behaviors. But yeah.
And so something else to maybe point out is like all this data, this is just live on the stream
Yeah.
data, and from a game that's live on a website kids are playing right now. And
Well,
so,
and I only know that it belongs to my pilot because I like had a bunch of kids and they just wrote down their anonymous name. And so then I downloaded the April file knowing which ones were my kids and just filtered it that way.
Do you have a sense yet of what fraction of players are exhibiting the behaviors of interest? Does everyone do it at some point? Is it like a few players that are really screwing around?
So that's one of the really interesting questions. And that's where like my proposal started. And then everybody said like, oh, that's really big. Please don't do that. So in part, I started there because one of the classrooms that we play tested with was a high school classroom. And we sat and like watched what they were doing on their computer, and most of them refused to engage with the game at all. And we were like, we're literally here to watch you play. Please play the game. And so we settled on just interviewing them, and we're like, why aren't you like engaging? And in that instance, it was that they wanted to get the companion curriculum that their teacher had assigned done in class. And they were like, I want to play the game at home. Like, it was almost like the classroom was not the place where they wanted to play.
Yeah.
And it was just restricting what they wanted to be able to do. So that's another thing that like, I know Dave's been thinking a lot about in the past of like, what difference does it make when players are playing outside of the school day versus in the school day?
and there's some really interesting data looking at the broad trends of some of this open game data, that like, we're pretty confident a lot of these play sessions take place during school hours.
Mhm.
Yeah. They don't really play on weekends. But also, some of these data collections have been going since the COVID transition. And it's real fascinating to look at the changes when everybody went home. Playtime's expanded, they got a lot less regular, they're coming back to school, they're getting back into being a more consistent school thing. I think another thing that's kind of interesting about Wake in particular, among the games that are on that data set, is Wake is a longer game. It's like, what, 10-ish hours, Dave?
Yeah, I think when it got speedrun, it was like 10.
And so you can't really play it in a class session. And you need to have some kind of return.
There's 50-something jobs.
Yeah, whereas a lot of the other games that are on that Open Game Data Resource right now are kind of classroom scaled. And so there's something you can finish in about 45 minutes. And so those are gonna change the dynamics of what we see.
I was just gonna ask, why are you choosing playful behaviors as the thing you're trying to identify, as opposed to, say, a learning outcome? Because presumably this structure, this system is meant to measure learning outcomes in the end. Or
So
perhaps not?
it was originally developed with the idea of trying to understand how different science practices and like the progression of when students learn how to make a claim, when they learn how to model data, how is that related to like their ability to do an experiment? And so we have some of that understanding. Part of my draw, like I said, to playful behaviors is that I'm always looking for opportunities to give credit to kids for what they are doing in a system, not just what they're not doing. But the second piece behind it is that in order to be really good at iterative experimentation, you have to be willing to think outside the box and to imagine variations of what you're doing. And that inherently is playful. So again, the initial proposal was to actually have an external science measure too, and try to draw some of these playful behaviors to proficiency. Because I do think that the students who are more playful in the system get more out of the game.
Okay, so that's your hypothesis. You're trying to kind of prove that out.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And also, this isn't the only thing that's being used that's using this data. So like Dave, the developer of the game, so they've been working on modeling the learning progression and performance and all that. Looking at this playful thing, it's all coming off the same trunk of data if it can. And so the Open Game Data System is not necessarily just built to measure learning, it's meant to facilitate the measurement and observation of various like logical phenomena and all these things.
Yeah, can I step in on that one too? Because I think, Eric, you just kind of nailed it, which is that assessing what learning looks like in a video game is not a straightforward task, and there isn't like one way to do it. And I think the design of this allows us to continue to argue about how there's evidence for learning that's being demonstrated in a given play session for years to come. So I think we're trying to keep that definition of what a learning outcome looks like open. And I think what Jenn is doing here with replays and qualitative coding of data is like right at the center of where I think we need to go with a lot of games, where we're getting to reinterpret like what's happening in this game that wasn't, it measures what people do, but we don't know what that means. And this is allowing us to put meaning on the doing kind of ad hoc and as needed, and just do that rigorously. And then, like I think was mentioned earlier, we can use that as some sort of outcome measure that then we want to model around. So it puts us into these great situations where instead of just measuring some assessment that we assume is correct that was built into the game during creation, we get to continue to make new outcome measures and then even put them and pit them against each other in the different models we build.
Has either you or anyone else using this game, this vast data set, done anything like, take generally kind of agreed upon learning outcomes from the game, like not looking for novel ones, but ones that we think are kind of well understood. And then taking these behavior logs and putting them in like a deep learning neural net to find patterns that correlate to the already established learning outcomes. Rather than, because it seems like you're doing a lot of work by hand that could be done by a neural net.
I'll comment on that one really quickly too. So we've got the one of the research threads, and the one that was at the center of getting this funded was to try to understand learning progressions that take place in a large scientific video game, right? So there's a literature that exists around, learning progressions and how they exist in given scientific topics, and a little bit around how they exist within scientific practices. And the hypothesis was, well, what if we do it with 1 million kids and we go multidimensional and we look at the relationship between science practices and topics? And because we do it with 1 million kids, we can find all the outlier situations, because these models will detect things down to, 3% of the population, and we don't have to worry about sampling sizes. And, a lot of that stuff is kind of solved by the rules of large numbers. So that's like the use case that we've been working from. And so yes, at the end of the day, we've built all kinds of models that look at different progressions and then look at outcomes. And at the end of the day, the best outcome that we've been using hasn't been some sort of learning measure, but it's actually been around this idea of struggle. And we're looking for kids that are exhibiting behaviors of struggle. And that ends up being a complex qualitative code as well. So kind of like what Jenn did in the first round, there was a paper that was published that did qualitative coding of log data using replay. And then we built models that would auto code the rest of the data that way. And then we used that outcome measure of struggle to model which progressions led to it. And in the end, it was a little messy. So I think we're back, like we came up with these great models, but in the end of the day, we didn't end up using the complex qualitative measure of struggle. We ended up using something much simpler around task switching, which was a real disappointment, because there's all kinds of things that explain task switching. So I think, yes, there's lots of models that are made, but I think the future of this is that replay that then feeds into automatic coders. So we have the human qualitative insights that then are amplified by machine learning that allow us to do it at scale and in real time, ends up being kind of more interesting in the long run than just looking at a numerical metric that's already present and clear. Or at least that's the hypothesis, right? That we'll be able to maximize or minimize on very interesting human kinds of behaviors instead of things that are already there as a number.
And that's it. Just to build on what Dave was saying, I was part of the team that was doing the struggle coding. And when we had the models, and it was, you go back and you're trying to validate that, yes, our model did work. And we were seeing a bunch of those examples where it was saying, oh, this kid is trying to run an experiment and they're still getting facts out, but they're not completing the task. And it was labeling that as struggle. And we had so many conversations around like, but are they struggling? Is that like, from whose perspective are they struggling? Is it from the game designer's perspective because you're not making progress? Is it from the teacher's perspective because they have an expectation that like a certain thing is going to happen in the game? Like, does the kid actually think that they're struggling? Like in that case, is it actually just that they're asking for help? And that's the best way to know that the kid thinks that they're struggling, because they're actually like trying to engage with the systems of support that exist in the game. And so that's part of where we were, like, we struggled with that model. One of the things that I haven't done with this data set, but I have been playing around with on a different game that I'm designing for a different lab I work with, is using large language models as part of building my evidence models. So that as I'm like defining constructs and thinking about, if I see this, does it actually mean that? I'm writing my data schema for what events we're going to be collecting from that game, and having it start to like think about what those indicators are, and kind of partnering with the large language model from that standpoint. I would love, and part of why I'm trying to get rid of all of the NANs that are in this weird text conversion, is that I'd love to actually try using a large language model to do some of the tagging of this, to see if that, one, it's a little bit more transparent than some of the like deep neural nets, in that you can understand like what features are actually, why it can explain why it's tagging some of the things that way. But yeah, all in the future of things that might happen.
I'll chime in on there too, because I think for the audience too that's out there, one of the goals is that by providing tools and data sets like this that are exactly what we're using, like inside the team, and then Jenn being kind of outside of our lab, but like a deep collaborator. What we're hoping is that other folks could like take up this work too and come up with totally different constructs and modes of analysis that we never thought of, because the data of what really happened in these hundreds of thousands of kids' classrooms, the data is more interesting than our theories, you know, in a lot of ways. So it's wonderful that like anybody can hop in and contribute to this work and come up with new constructs and new methods based on all your clever ways of thinking about it that we would never come up with. So we're really trying to see an ecosystem around that where you don't have to be the game developer to do this kind of analysis or to contribute to the methodologies that are possible.
I was kind of going to say, it's like, I think in the strictest sense, no one has applied deep learning to the code to come with it, but you could do it next week. And this is kind of a vibe of the educational data mining community where a lot of this kind of came out of, and there's a lot of existing stuff in more formal ed technologies that are similar to this, where it's like a bunch of data sets out there and a little bit of understanding of how the experience went, and now go talk whatever statistical machine learning, whatever garbage you want at it, and see what comes out. And so yeah, the data's out there if anybody wants to try to chase that.
We have used video analytics software at Mayo Clinic to measure joy and related sentiment around, so sentiment analysis around, experiencing healthcare, for example. So that can easily be used sort of beyond sort of what people are clicking on and not clicking on. So you can actually read moments of individual and sort of collective joy around video games. It's sort of like, think of it as a very fancy polygraph. You're essentially using videographic polygraph. And you can even, attach, you can measure micro sweat while you're doing that as well. So you can, measure physiologic response, stimulus response to video games, as well as sort of facial recognition of emotion change. And it's actually just almost disturbingly accurate from having both participated and as a sort of test subject and being a researcher on it. So that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, and we've been talking about that from the perspective of the broader open infrastructure of having hooks to do things like biometrics, video, stuff like that. And obviously those can't be in the publicly released tranches of data because of all kinds of privacy stuff, particularly when kids are involved. But having tools where that could still be recorded, and if you're part of that research team, you have ways to connect it to the public data. And essentially trying to keep things as available as legally ethically possible, while still supporting other kinds of tooling. And so we have been looking into and considering how would we bring in things like biometrics. And also biometrics and things are also interesting because like their timescales are very minute, whereas like log data is usually more in the orders of seconds is all that really matters. But like EEG is like nanoseconds. And matching between signals that come from very different time dimensions. Also kind of interesting. We are close to time, and I just want to pop a thing up. You stop sharing. Oh, actually, no, I don't. You don't have to. Just so that people have it. I wanted to bring this slide back up again. So if you're interested, our data sets are up here. Also, there's a get involved page on this page that has all these other links on it. If you have games that you want to make sure people actually play, they don't have to connect to all the data stuff. So the vault is just games are available, the teachers will play them. This is about to be advertised to, what did you say, Dave? Like hundreds of thousands of teachers?
Yeah, something on that scale for the fall campaign, yeah.
Want to make sure games live and people play them. And then if you're interested in these open office hour sessions, we have a Slack that we hang out on. And there's a form here that you can fill out to join that. I'm also looking to sort of schedule out our schedule for the fall semester. So if you have a project that you think would be kind of fun to talk about in a setting like this, let me know. And we can talk. I think I'm also thinking of doing, we might do this fall, that I was kind of thinking about pointing at Jen too, is both having sessions of like, I've got a project, here's a project, but also like, here's a technique, I'm just gonna deep dive and teach you how that technique works. So like hearing more about how this DNA stuff and how we think about these n-dimensional squash graphs. I do a lot of learning curve analysis and knowledge component modeling myself, and I was thinking of showing that off for people that might be interested in other techniques. So also, if you have a particular technique, you might want to do like a little clinic on, we could do that as well. And yeah, we have like 2 more minutes. We're gonna hang out, but, and we'll certainly happy to answer any questions, anything else.
Thank you. This was a